Well, good morning, Pacific Club and guests. It's 11 a.m. and we'll get underway. This is a distinguished speakers event for the Pacific Club. Our distinguished guest today is Professor Tom Fingar, a professor at Stanford University. His specialty is China, and I can't think of a more timely talk than talk on China today. His topic is U.S. relations with China. It's not as bad as it seems, so I'm anxious to have him define that and hear what he has to say. Professor Fingar has spoken with the Pacific Club or at the Pacific Club back in January of 20, so just a year ago. And we're delighted to have him back for an update here. He'll be introduced in just a few minutes by Pacific Club member Jennifer, Jennifer Keller. Waki Ray is the Pacific Club member who brought the professor to us. Waki had met him on a trip to China on one of the Stanford educational tours and brought us in. Waki is just recovering from surgery, and so we've asked Jennifer to do the introduction today. In place of a Pledge of Allegiance, I like to offer words of inspiration or wisdom. I would observe that we've just survived our second impeachment trial. COVID seems to be abating. Many of us are now getting our first or second shots, and therefore I pronounce there is a God, and we look forward to returning to normal. The old economy is what I'm looking forward to. Ann and I already have booked a flight to Seattle at the end of March to celebrate our granddaughter's 9th birthday, and we hope we're able to make that. We're getting back to normal. I just hope that the shots actually work, and if they don't, what's the remedy? Do we get our money back? If you find out that the shot was ineffective, hopefully that won't become a problem. Before we introduce Jennifer, I'm going to introduce some special guests. And the past president's club at the Pacific Club is Bob Curry, past president. We have board members on today's call: Joe Stapleton, Bruce Corbett, and Jim Burra. Special guests today, DOCA members from across the United States that include Gary Herbert, DOCA president from San Francisco and Berkeley grad, Bob Jans, DOCA chair from Chicago. And I was, before this session started, I was giving Professor Fingar a little bit of background on DOCA and its mission and the fact that we get to visit military installations and U.S. embassies around the world. It's quite good. Some past DOCA presidents with us today: Bob Curry, Michael Schein, Frank Weinberg. John Gates is president of the Navy League here in Orange County. He's on the call today. And we also have one of our returning speakers, Bill Holders, on the call. And so welcome to all of our special guests. Of course, I'd like to identify our special staff at the Pacific Club: Joe Gatto and Karen Ringer. Oscar Neves, who puts these he's our technician that puts these shows together. So thank you for your continued work. The Pacific Club is doing well. Our big tent in the parking lot serves as our main dining room. Hopefully one of these days soon we'll be back inside after we all get our shots. So upcoming speakers next week, Tuesday, February 23rd, 11 a.m. will be a Zoom. John Morlock, impact of COVID on Orange County's communities. You may know that John lost his seat in Sacramento. He's now running for his old supervisor seat here, so we're looking forward to welcoming John Morlock back. March 2nd at 11 a.m. will be a Zoom. Dr. Ali Alehi, he's a neurosurgeon, and he operates an entity called NeuroSpa Brain. He's going to be talking about recent developments in disabling items such as Alzheimer's, other form of cognitive impairment, including depression, disorder, chronic pain, Parkinson's disease, and stroke. He'll be introduced by a former member, John Herman. April 13th at 11, which will be a Tuesday, Lauren Solomon, personal coach. She's going to be introduced by Jim Glassman. How to dress well and act well. After COVID, we all may need a brush-up course. So just a warning that that's coming. And upcoming speakers beyond that: Greg Custer's working on an economic update with Jim Doty and Mark Mueller, the publisher of the Orange County Business Journal. We are just now contacting Robert Jordan, former ambassador to Saudi Arabia, who's agreed to speak. So we've got an interesting lineup coming forward. One technical item that I'll cover this morning: if you have a question for Professor Fingar, please go to chat at the bottom of your screen, click on my name, Bob Mosier, send it to me, and I will field the questions for Professor Fingar. So now to move on and introduce Jennifer Kellers to introduce our guest. She is a lawyer by trade. Her law firm is Keller & Drell. They're litigators. Chamber USA and Chamber Global ranks Jennifer among America's top litigators. Benchmark Lawyer and Super Lawyer agree. Jennifer's top ranked lawyer in all of these various forums. So we have a top litigator on it. I got to know Jennifer just after the last session when I made an off-color or offhanded comment about China. She called me on it. Unfortunately, we were able to resolve it. She didn't sue me. I was worried that after having read her bio, that if she sued me, I'd be in deep yogurt. So we're delighted to have her here. She's been a member of the Pacific Club since 2016, 5 years ago. She is a Cal graduate. Nothing's perfect in this world, so we have a Cal graduate introducing a Stanford graduate. Jennifer has a grown son who's a lawyer at Munger Tolles, and she enjoys golf, hiking, opera, and theater, two of which have survived COVID. So congratulations on that. She also has a cabin up in Trinidad, California, northern part of California, where she hibernated during part of COVID. Trinidad is distinctive in California as one of the smallest incorporated cities with a population of 367, or today 366, as Jennifer's down here. So her greatest accomplishment during COVID is learning to dress from the waist up. We all sit before these TV screens, and so she said she was on a hearing call the other day with a judge who said, I'm going to request everybody to stand up so I can see what they're really wearing. So hopefully that won't be necessary today. Jennifer, pitching in for Walkie Ray, please introduce our special guest.
Thanks so much. China is regularly described as a strategic competitor with ambitions and perhaps the ability to disrupt the US-led international order and displace the United States as the preeminent actor on the world stage. The current narrative also describes the US relationship as a contest for supremacy with increasing dangers of conflict. Dr. Fingar will explain why such assertions are wrong and why policy responses based on flawed assessment of China's and America's capabilities are dangerous and doomed to fail. Thomas Fingar is a Shorenstein APARC Fellow at the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University, where he leads a project on China and the world. His most recent China book is Fateful Decisions, Choices That Will Shape China's Future, although I understand that late last night, his next book, From Mandate to Blueprint, was released. He has twice served as Assistant Secretary of State for Intelligence and Research and as the first Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Analysis. He earned his BA at Cornell and his MA and PhD at Stanford, all in political science. I could take up the whole hour talking about his background, and I know you don't want me to do that. But in addition to Dr. Fingar's distinguished career, both in academia and in intelligence, he's won some interesting recognition and awards. He received the Presidential Rank Award for Distinguished Service Professional because he had led the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, the INR, through a transformative period of reinvention and rejuvenation, responding to humanitarian emergencies such as HIV/AIDS, reconstruction in Afghanistan and Iraq, and tsunami relief, the transformation of its terrorism database after 9/11, and shifted its focus into a more modern approach. One of the things that really stood out to me is that he, and former Secretary of State Colin Powell called Dr. Fingar's, quote, moral courage and sense of purpose, something that had transformed into the INR into an outstanding intelligence outfit. The reason for that, I think, the reason that it stands out so much to me is that he oversaw preparation of the landmark 2007 National Intelligence Estimate on Iran, in which all 16 US intelligence agencies concluded with high confidence that Iran had halted its nuclear weapon design and weaponization work in 2003. Those who were pressing for an attack on Iran in 2008 found themselves fighting an uphill battle, largely as a result of Dr. Fingar's professional intelligence analysis that he led, which was described as fearlessly honest. He said he would not allow the national intelligence estimate to be, quote, fixed around the policy, unquote, the damning phrase that has been used to describe the unconscionable process that served up fraudulent intelligence and justified a war in Iraq. But clearly, the number one focus of Dr. Fingar is China. He speaks Mandarin fluently. He's been involved in studying all aspects of Chinese politics and policymaking. Nobody knows China better than he does. So we're delighted to have Dr. Fingar today. Welcome, Doctor, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks to Bob Mosher for the invitation, to Jennifer, the very generous introduction, and my request to all of you in contact with Walkie Ray to please convey my wishes for a speedy recovery. I've titled this talk, U.S.-China Relations, Not as Bad as It Sounds. That the rhetoric around China has diminished since the election, as it has for every presidential election during my career, where China is spotlighted, often in a negative, usually in a negative way, and then that rhetoric diminishes after the election. But it still fuels heated rhetoric, and it still will shape US policies and interactions with China. Much of it is of a hand-wringing character. There are, to be sure, real issues in the relationship. Most of them are economic. Others involve human rights issues, political issues. But to give the bottom line up first, these issues are manageable. I think most of them either are or can be moved in a more positive direction. And we're not headed for either decoupling from China, I'll explain what that means, or war, the most extreme versions of this, the Chinese are out to get us rhetoric that was so prominent during the last year. My characterization draws upon Mark Twain's description of Wagner's music, that it's not nearly as bad as it sounds. The US-China relationship has had more problematic periods. I say that in part because I've worked on and in and with China now for 56 years. But because my perspective is that of a participant observer, that I've been studying China and interacting with China as an academic for a long time. But I've also been involved directly in the shaping and implementation of US policy toward China since the, since the Nixon administration. I was part of the delegation that received the ping pong team, but in a substantive way since the Ford administration, when I was tapped to head one of the groups to develop strategies to normalize relations. So I'm not a completely objective observer, but I think I am a well-informed observer on the subject. But the current narrative is wrong. And I'll briefly indicate why I think it is wrong, but more importantly, to underscore the point that to have policies that are going to work, policies that are going to achieve American objectives, it's necessary to first have a correct understanding of the other party and of ourselves, frankly. That much of the narrative about China posits a China that has capabilities beyond what it does or is likely to have in any of our lifetimes, but it also undervalues and underappreciates the strengths of the United States and the inertia that is in the system. But the current narrative that holds that the policy of 8 administrations, Nixon through Obama, was naive, was foolhardy, and was disadvantageous to the United States. All of those characterizations, in my view, are wrong. They misconstrue the policy. They ignore its origins and the logic, and trivialize or distort the results of that policy. And I'll illustrate that with some examples. the claim that has appeared recently that the policy was naive and foolish because it aimed to transform China into some type of a tame democracy that would willingly, even eagerly accept American preeminence in the world, wait to be told what to do in the system, and generally behave in a compliant fashion. I mentioned the long period in which I was involved in policy in Ford through Bush 43, because I cannot remember a time when anybody made the claim that the goal of the policy was to transform China into a democracy. And the people with whom I worked, 100 of us signed a letter about a year ago that China was not the enemy. None of us can remember or can find instances of congressional testimony or other state claiming the political transformation of China to be the objective of US policy. But there were people who did characterize it that way outside of the US government. First and foremost in China. They characterized it as an attempt at peaceful transformation, to policy to achieve regime change. They trace it back to John Foster Dulles in a Life magazine interview from the 1950s, which no American that I'm aware of remembers that interview, but the Chinese cite it often. The criticism of it that describes the policy impute political transformation as the primary goal. That was not it. It was actually an extension of fundamental Cold War policies and the basic strategy of the Cold War. It was extended to China in late 1978 for reasons mostly having to do with enhancing US security and economic opportunity and creating more opportunities to achieve what can be summarized as missionary goals, now be referred to as people to people, civil society, institution to institution, non-governmental contacts that include economic but are mostly outside of the economic arena. The goal of the engagement policy was to make China a stronger partner. From Nixon's visit in 1972, the beginning of rapprochement with Mao Zedong, there was only one real objective, and that was to complicate the calculus of the Soviet Union. Moscow could not assume that if it interfered with the United States, American interests, that China would do nothing, and could not assume that if the Soviet Union did something disadvantageous to China, that the United States would do nothing. There were no expectations of political transformation, even economic interaction, until 1978. This was pure balance of power, realpolitik. The enemy of my enemy can be my friend. And the assumption in the early 70s and when engagement began in the late 70s was that the Cold War was with us forever. And that China, if China could be made a partner in this never-ending existential struggle, it would be better to have a strong partner than a weak partner. That would enhance China's security, would enhance the security of the alignment, as our alliance relationships with NATO, with Japan, with Korea, enhanced our own security. It was the same logic. And that if China was to become stronger, it had to become more modern. It had to have a more developed economy. If it had a more developed economy, became more prosperous, it would buy more stuff from us. It would create more commercial opportunities for Americans and American firms, and it would improve the well-being of the Chinese people. better healthcare, better education, more liberal domestic environment in order to create an environment for entrepreneurial activity. That was the basic structure. It was not unique to China. What was unique about China is it was the first and ultimately the only authoritarian Communist Party run country that was admitted to the, quote, free world structure, the rules-based international order built and maintained by the United States. With the end of the Cold War, the demise of the Stalinist example of an alternative form of development and China's success in developing by working within the liberal order persuaded essentially every other country in the globe to adopt a similar approach to what China has done. The key to the success of US policy, that Cold War policy, and as applied to China, was asymmetric access to the United States. In the security realm, we assumed and carried a disproportionately heavy burden for the security of the free world. Not because, or not only because we were nice guys, but because it was in our interest to do so. We also used this asymmetric access. We granted others better access to our markets, our financial capabilities, our education and training institutions than we demanded that they give us. We used our economic strength, our technological strength, and so forth to strengthen our partners. 30 years after the end of the Cold War, Americans appropriately ask, why are we still doing that? It worked. Our partners, our allies are much stronger, much more prosperous. There is no enemy to equal the Soviet Union or the Sino-Soviet alliance or the Warsaw Pact to threaten us. A part of that questioning of Cold War strategy is focused on China for two reasons primarily. One is the sheer size of China. China has taken advantage of the asymmetric access more so than most, more effectively than all but a few. That if China wasn't so big, the unfair aspects or behaviors that are now perceived as unfair or no longer necessary wouldn't matter so much. If Paraguay or Mali exploited the opportunities that we provided in the way China does, it wouldn't matter. But China is enormous. China's economy is huge. China's S&T establishment is very, very large. So it matters because of size. It also matters because China cheats. That's the correct word. In taking advantage of opportunities, it's kind of gone beyond the permissible theft of intellectual property. Demands for transfers of technology within joint ventures. Failure to honor World Trade Organization commitments and the like. And again, it matters because of scale. Is China a better or worse player? It's a more consequential player, even if its behavior is arguably, in some respects, not much worse than others. When China entered into this arrangement in the late 1970s, 1978 specifically, its intention was to utilize access to the developed world, which was more or less synonymous with the free world, the US and its allies in Europe and plus Japan. So North America, Europe, and Japan. It was to use export-led growth to jumpstart the Chinese economy, to minimize its depth of engagement, minimize its vulnerability from interdependence, to sloganize as get in, get rich, get out. jumpstart China, go back to a search for an autarkic model of development with a much stronger China, a China that had greater freedom of action. Those of us who were involved at the time understood clearly that was the Chinese intention. In effect, we said, without confronting them and putting it in their face here, you're welcome to try. But the export-led growth model, which was sloganized as following the Japanese path to development, the Japanese path to development. It wasn't really the Japanese path, it was the Taiwan path of development. But to call it that would have been anathema to people in Beijing and not very prudent on the part of the United States. But it was to use export-led growth, use the rules-based international order, take advantage of training and financial opportunities, market opportunities beyond China's borders in order to accelerate development, improve the lot of the people. And part of the consequence of that was to bolster the legitimacy of the regime. The reason the US adopted a "you're welcome to try" attitude was the experience that we had gained in working with other countries that had preceded China: Japan, Taiwan, Republic of Korea. There's other Confucian societies, Asian societies, rice bowl cultures, if you will. And that lesson was, as one participates in this rules-based liberal international order, as one interacts with the societies, the legal systems, not just of the United States, but of all of the members of that free world club, success begets dependence, and continued success requires deeper engagement, deeper involvement. So the unspoken attitude of the Americans involved with us, and the Chinese said they were going to do this, regain capability, not get too deeply involved, and then dropped out, was good luck. But if you jump off the merry-go-round, you stop moving around. If you leave this system on which you will become increasingly dependent, your growth will slow. Your legitimacy will be challenged. Your security will be eroded. And in the course of doing it, you'll make other countries and companies more angry with you, but you're welcome to try. History has shown over 40 years that China's desire to minimize its involvement and engagement and dependence on this international order has been a failure. They're ever more deeply involved. Their continued viability as a system depends on continuing to work within that system. That doesn't mean they have to like or have to accept every aspect of it. Clearly, they don't like the United States' leading position in this system, but they can't think of anybody they'd rather have, and they can't imagine a system that doesn't have a leader. And for the time being, that's us. They certainly realize that they are not at all close to being ready to exercise leadership of the liberal international order. Another part of this narrative is that it really worked to China's advantage and American disadvantage. That's often asserted and not often substantiated, and it's not substantiated because it really can't be. And let me just use a couple of illustrations. Facts really do matter. That China's rise to the second largest economy in the world, that has occurred with US assistance, support. But in 1978, when China embarked upon reform and opening and the US began engagement, the US share of the global economy was roughly 26%. 40 plus years later, China's rise, other developments in the world, like the breakup of the Soviet Union, the expansion of the European Union from 18 to 27 countries, the rise of Japan, the rise of Korea, increasing role of India, Indonesia, and so forth. The US share of the global economy has decreased. Last year, we were all the way down to 24.5% of the global economy. Our share of world economy decreased less than the decrease in our share of world population. We produced roughly 25% of the global economy with 4.3% of the world's people. China produces 15% of the world economy with 17% of the global population. It's still punching way below its weight in here. Put another number on it. Per capita income in the United States, per capita GDP, excuse me, in the United States, 1978, was about $12,000. Today, it's $62,000. We haven't done too bad. America has not done badly. We've got a distribution problem in our country. Is that tremendous increase in economic performance has not been equitably distributed. But China over that period had dramatic increases. But they began at $160 per capita. Now they're up to they're slightly less than $10,000. It's a very impressive increase for a huge country. But China's per capita GDP is still below the world average. It's done very well in comparison to its own past. It has not done all that much better, and it's done considerably worse in many respects than its Asian neighbors, the other Asian tigers, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. But what did engagement achieve besides making China more prosperous, stronger, more influential? Well, it's contributed to, and probably in my judgment, the most important factor, contributing to the longest period of peace in East Asia in modern history. It's not an accident that East Asia is now the most dynamic, fastest growing region of the world. And over that period, with diminished uncertainty and instability of China and its role in the region and the US engagement, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and now increasingly the states of Southeast Asia are growing grew as fast as China did. The ones that are starting now in Southeast Asia are growing faster than China achieved. A notable difference between the other East Asian tigers and China is that China's period of miracle growth, the double-digit growth, that lasted about 35 years. It lasted longer than that of the other Asian tigers. Why did it last longer? Because it started from a lower base. And it's simple mathematics. But the real difference is that the Chinese miracle growth period plateaued in about 2009, and is now decreasing, before China achieved highly developed economy status. All of the other Asian tigers made it into the World Bank's highly developed economy status. Now that means something beyond bragging rights. It's a moving number that changes every year, it goes up every year as to what qualifies as the minimal requirement to have that status. And currently it's 12,000 and something per capita. So China is a couple thousand below that. But it's the state capacity that is required to produce high levels of economic achievement and sustain it. It involves a healthcare system, it involves social services of all kinds, it involves military, industrial, agricultural capacity, and China doesn't have it yet. At the start of the engagement period, China belonged to almost no transnational control regimes, international control regimes, outside of a few under the United Nations. You can count them on one hand. Now China belongs to more than 150 of these control regimes. In international relations theories, big powers don't want to be a part of multilateral control regimes. This is Lilliputian methods to tie down Gulliver. This enables little countries to come together and constrain big powers. The United States is an anomaly in world history by being a major, major power that elected to protect our own interests by working within multilateral arrangements, whether it's the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, now the START, New START Agreement limiting nuclear weapons, World Trade Organization, and on and on and on. There are a couple hundred of these control regimes that undergird a rules-based system, that rules and norms for behavior in the international, that constrain everybody. China has accepted grudgingly to be sure, the constraints that go along with it because they benefited. China's rise, China's achievements have been accomplished by working with and within the rules-based order, not against it and not outside it. And increasingly, they recognize that if they're going to continue to grow, to become more capable of meeting the demands and expectations of their own people and their desire for influence internationally, they have to stick within that rules-based system. Understandably, they want a larger voice in what those rules are, but they're not looking to overturn the apple cart here. We conclude that very brief summary of the engagement, but China did well. The US and many other countries also did well, and many of them did better, including us, by the criteria that are normally used to judge it. But the current narrative, I'll shift now to strategic competition, that the US foolishly created a monster, an unstoppable juggernaut that is now a peer or strategic competitor that challenges the United States in every area of endeavor all around the world. The extreme version of this holds that China will win, which is baffling because it assumes that either it has a better system or that we are in hopeless terminal decline, neither of which is true, it's demonstrably not true. But the less extreme version holds that the United States should do everything possible to constrain China. If we're to maintain our role in the world, our prosperity, the freedom that we have at home, we must contain and constrain China. That our success depends on thwarting the ambitions of others. And among the problems that are wrong with that strategy is that many, many other countries also have aspirations. I can't think of any country, and I can think of very few people who aspire to be number 6 or number 3 or number 2. People aspire to be the best. Most don't make it. And we may not retain that and probably will not retain it forever, but we're not in imminent danger of losing it. But what do people point to in this strategic competition to indicate why China is such a problem and we are so disadvantaged? One is the size of China's economy. In nominal current dollars, China has the second largest economy. That it's approximately $12 trillion. The US in current dollars is $19 trillion. In purchasing power parity, China surpassed the United States 6 or 7 years ago. purchasing power parity. China's 24 trillion, we're 21 trillion. That is only meaningful in terms of saying, how many pairs of shoes and how much at the grocery store could people in China purchase with their income? It doesn't say very much about what you can buy on the international market or how much of a military you can support. So I still prefer current dollars for making the comparisons. But I said the miracle growth period is over for China. That virtually nobody predicts that China will be able to grow at faster than about 4% 4 or 5 years from now. It's going to decline to 3% or less. That's still decent growth, but it's typical of a mature economy, a big economy. You can't grow so fast when you get very big. As China approaches a growth rate that is closer to what ours is and what ours can be, the perception of China rising and the US stagnating should change. China's image in the international system, this lag time, China is still perceived as a much faster growing country than it actually is and has been for several years. One of the reasons it will slow is that what is called the demographic dividend is over. The flowing of large numbers of people into the workforce because of simple demography. Over China's period of miracle growth, it added a few people to the workforce. 400 million people. That's more than the total population of the United States. Each one didn't have to do very much to produce a significant increase in the overall size of the economy. But China's population has ceased to grow. It plateaued a few years ago and is now declining. What are some consequences of that? One is an aging society. China has one of the fastest aging populations in the world. When it started its run in 1978, the ratio of workers to retirees, to dependents, retirees plus children, was about 16-1. It's approaching 2-1. China, by the end of the decade, will have more people over 60 than there are people in the United States. Because of 2 generations of 1 child per family, that means every married couple can look forward to supporting 4 parents and 8 grandparents, unless the system can come up with a system of elder care and to finance healthcare. The strain on a healthcare system designed to deal with infectious diseases and broken bones, and it's done very well. That the life expectancy at birth in China today is higher than it is in the United States. They've done a good job with sort of basic healthcare, but they have almost no capacity for chronic diseases, coronary, cancer, diabetes, and oh yeah, Alzheimer's. That who takes care of grandma? Who stays home if you need 2 people to pay for the apartment that you have bought? There's some tough times ahead. Another indicator, China is the largest trading nation. Well, that's a function of being the last stop in production chains. Multi-nation chains that involve many, many countries. Because China entered with this demographic, large numbers of low-skilled, low-wage people that took the last step. They put it in the box. And then it comes to the United States and other markets. China is a huge exporting country, major trading, but almost none of this stuff stays in China. It's just a pass-through. And the added value on many things is pretty small. But the trade figures don't include what's called the backdoor trade in China. American and foreign firms that manufacture in China and then sell technically illegally into the Chinese market. The Chinese domestic market is pretty big. How big is this backdoor? From American firms, the value that is sold in China doesn't get shipped to California and get shipped back to China, so it doesn't show up in trade statistics. But the value exceeds the magnitude of the bilateral trade deficit. So why are companies interested in staying in China? Because they make money. Why does a misguided notion of trade statistics and trade balances lead to a perception of a problem with China? Because it doesn't count the backdoor trade. Two more things, and then I'll go, where's it going? China's military. China has put a lot of money into its military since the first Gulf War. Like everybody else, they watched on television. What most people didn't realize watching on television, one of the very first battles, the Iraqi army was equipped with Chinese military gear. The battle lasted 15 minutes. It was a real wake-up call to the Chinese that they had a military that was not a 21st century military. And they've just made a concerted effort to get there. They spent invested double-digit increases for a couple decades. And now it's got a much more powerful military. Their Navy has more ships than the US Navy. Doesn't have greater firepower, doesn't have greater capability, but they got more ships. Then they're building more airplanes, building more nuclear weapons. They've changed the strategic picture in the Western Pacific. Can't be ignored. They can challenge US preeminence in the region. That's true. But what does it mean? What do we intend to do with that preeminence? Is there somebody we intend to conquer? And the answer is no. So we're thwarted from doing things we're not doing anyway. Two more things: political influence, Belt and Road Initiative, building infrastructure around the world. The numbers are silly. Not going to invest $6 trillion in doing this. There are regions that infrastructure was not built early. Economic viability is one. But China, in the years since 2013, when they began this, and have put a lot of money, a lot of effort into it, mostly as loans, now coming due, countries incapable of repaying them. There are people that say, well, this gives China tremendous leverage because they've got a debtor that owes them. The country is saying, in essence, we're sorry we can't pay for the bridge. It's yours. If you want it, take it. The hell do you do with the bridge, right? The Chinese are learning what we learned in Africa and Europeans learned after. When you loan money to dead base, they don't pay you back. And China's experienced that. And more importantly, China's image and China's relationship with pretty literally every country in the world, every recipient of BRI project is worse now than when it started. Interaction with us is corrosive to authoritarian regimes. Interaction with China makes people mad or makes them unhappy. So what do we do? And I'll wind this up real quick so we can do some questions. If we understand China properly, yes, it is a major country. Yes, it is a important player in all kinds of respects, but it is not an unstoppable juggernaut. It's going to have real problems. And I think we need to prepare more to deal with a stumbling giant than an unstoppable one. The number of things that could go wrong in China is very, very large. The trade-offs that are going to be necessary to improve the education system. Half the children in China do not go beyond middle school. You don't make it into a high-tech economy where half of your future workers have a middle school education. Providing health care, providing elder care, paying for the military that they've already built. maintaining the infrastructure that they've built. They have a fantastic high-speed rail system. It's wonderful. By Chinese numbers, exactly 2 lines make money. Most of them don't make enough money to cover maintenance costs, let alone ever amortizing these things. And at some point, the bill comes due. China, as I said earlier, really has no alternative except to continue to work within the rules-based international order, the US-led rules-based international order. Its most important economic partners are all US allies. China has a strong military. It has one ally, North Korea, which it wishes it didn't have. That's not a particularly beneficial relationship. Our allies in East Asia include Japan and South Korea, the 9th and 10th largest military budgets in the world. So what should we do? What should the Biden administration do? Not decoupling, not attempt to sever relations, reduce any kind of economic, educational, financial ties. It's not possible. The way our system is structured, the US government is much less of a player than state governments, than the private sector is. And most want to maintain a relationship with China. They want help from the government, but they want engagement to continue. Containment can't work because, give or take, not a single country would join the United States in that effort. So we'd be all alone trying to do something. We can and must work with China on a number of international issues important to us. Taking Biden's agenda, the climate change issues, global warming consequences. Got to work with China on this, on it, or there is no solution. Pandemic concerns can work with China, but we shouldn't fixate on China. The policy should be, and my early reading of the Biden administration, the intentions are to treat China as a place where we have issues, to not treat China as the focus. We must do everything to manage China, even if that has deleterious consequences for our rebuilding of education, rebuilding of infrastructure, rebuilding of arrangements around the world. So we'll respond to China when we must, work with it when we can. We're not going to return to some imaginary halcyon days of cooperation and kumbaya, walk together, but we're not headed towards catastrophe. We're not heading towards conflict, and we're not headed towards second place. Let me stop there. Apologies for running long.
Professor Fingar, thank you very much for a very enlightening and excellent talk. You're second in a year on China, and it's always great to hear from you and hear your perspective. 2 items that you didn't touch on, to my recollection, are Taiwan and Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. Can you just incorporate a few comments on those 2 hotspots?
Sure. Let me go with Hong Kong first. What Beijing has done is terrible. It was almost certain to be counterproductive. I think they acted because of fear of contagion. They understand better than anybody how fragile that place is, how fragile China is, how many things could go wrong. The danger of public dissatisfaction about food quality, childcare, whatever it is, there's plenty of reason to be unhappy. The democracy movement in Hong Kong is perceived as having the potential, if it would stay in Hong Kong, you can wall it off, but it wouldn't. It would spread over, and that was the fear. So they cracked down on Hong Kong in a way that's terrible for Hong Kong, people of Hong Kong. It's also dumb because the big prize is Taiwan for Beijing. And the relationship had deteriorated after the election of Tsai Ing-wen to her first term, going back 5 years now. But the economic relationship between them is very strong. Taiwan, which once didn't matter that much to the United States, rhetoric aside, because it was led by another authoritarian Leninist regime built in the Soviet Union, the Kuomintang, has now become the poster child for everything the United States wants other countries to become. A highly democratic, marketized economy that does lots of good things. So it is a real challenge for the United States to maintain the policy of deliberate ambiguity or strategic ambiguity, the essence of which is we do not want Beijing to ever assume that we would not come to the assistance of Taiwan if they were to take military action or do other pressure techniques. And we don't want Taiwan to ever assume that we will automatically come to their assistance if they do something like declare a unilateral independence. So the uncertainty that we seek to engender is to avoid triggering actions by the other side and avoid enmeshing us in a conflict in that part of the world.
Very good. India, is India in the hunt here with their Silicon Valley-like operation north of Bombay? Is it a threat to China and the U.S. In this area?
I think it's a long way from being a threat to anybody except itself. But the Indians learned from the Chinese experience. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Indians abandoned Nehruvian socialism and adopted an export-led model. And that made it attractive to us and lots of other countries. China will soon be overtaken by India in population. India is just entering into its period of demographic dividend. It has lots and lots of ambitious young people willing to work for it. So a lot of economic activity that went to China in the 80s is going to go to India now. Not just from the United States, from many developed countries. That the regime, or the government in Delhi has greater legitimacy than the one in Beijing, but it hasn't been able to deliver very much. It's held together a highly diverse country through its democracy, but its legal system and its economic system are still wanting. So it has tremendous potential. It's been growing for several years now, faster than China, and it has a very strong military. But it, in my view, is not a good candidate. It's not to think about an alliance with India to contain China. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me on it. Is it a threat to China? No. That India is fixated on China. That's the enemy that matters. China's fixated on us. And when it was fixated on us and the Soviet Union, it could take care of India with the stuff that it had acquired for other purposes.
Thanks. Actually, Joel Lippman sent in a question about Taiwan, and I think you've answered that here. I have a question from Nahal Kazami, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. I'm a former Foreign Service officer who worked during the Obama administration to try to convince our European allies to join in the pivoting to Asia, an effort that gets the allies to work together on issues in the region, including encouraging China to remain responsible player within the rules of based international order. Obviously, we didn't maintain that policy. Do you see the need for another attempt to pivot to Asia? And if so, will it be different this time?
The pivot to Asia, as I understood it, was primarily to reassure our Asian partners that we were not going to retreat from Asia in the way that we were retreating and retrenching from the rest of the world. We go through these episodic periods, did under Nixon, did under Eisenhower, did under Nixon, where after long periods of conflict, we need to turn inward. And that, while we were drawing down in the Middle East and South Asia to assure we weren't drawing down in Asia. We weren't building up, but we were going to. But the economic dimensions of this, put in place the Trans-Pacific Partnership, to put in architecture for working together in a region that, it's the most dynamic, largest. It has almost no structure, no architecture, except the legacy bilateral alliances from the Cold War. But something to work together, doing it economically. I think pulling out of that was the second biggest mistake that Trump made. Because the others, the 11 without us, continued. It opened markets in Japan that we've been trying to open for decades. Now others are filling those markets. We're playing catch up. As Obama told Xi at Sunnylands, he was open to having China join the TPP. I think it'd be easier for China actually than it was for Japan to meet the conditions. If we had gone ahead, it would have set the terms for the transatlantic economic relationship with the European Union, because we were not going to have two sets of standards and rules. We're going to have one, and the Asian arena was ahead. Let me stop.
A final question, and our hour is just about up, but the prior administration maintained that China should pay a price for having spread the COVID virus, not called the proper attention to it. Should China pay a price? And should we look at it as a future COVID generating thing where we would have restraints, or can we trust them to do the right thing and not let COVID go worldwide again?
I don't know how China would have contained the COVID virus. Did China make mistakes in its handling? Yes. Were they not as transparent and forthcoming as they should have been? Yes. Did they spread this deliberately? No. I am not a physician, I'm not a scientist, but been around long enough to know something entirely new emerges, like this virus did, that people didn't know instantly what they had and how to handle it and fumbled around. Unlike the very, very smooth handling in the United States. I'm sure that more Americans got on airplanes and spread it around the world than Chinese spread it here directly. The 40,000 Americans that flew back from China after COVID was identified and not tested or traced is inexcusable. We have to work with China. We have to work with every country for global health issues because they're global. That anybody that gets sick anywhere is an airplane ride away from us. And anybody that gets sick here is an airplane ride away. Many, many of these types of diseases originate in Asia, where people live in close proximity to animals. Sooner or later, that'll be the case with Africa as a source. But until that changes, it's in our interest to work with China, not attempt to punish them for having its people get sick first.
Before I conclude, tell us about your latest book. I think you have a picture of it.
I can hold it up.
Yeah. And tell us how, if we wanted to get a copy, where do we go?
This, like a book that was a basis for part of my talk today, are available from Stanford University Press. It's also on Amazon. Fateful Choices is the China book. This one, From Mandate to Blueprint, uses lessons from my experience when I was the stuckee to implement the most far-reaching reform of the national security establishment since '47, intended for new appointees across the US government. How do you get things done in Washington, and what do you think about?
Great, thank you. Professor Fingar, what a way to spend an hour and 5 minutes. Very informative. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today and share your thoughts with us. We like to reward our speakers with dinner for two. I think you've already got dinner for two from your last appearance here, so now you have dinner for four. We have a big tent right now, but hopefully we hope to be back in session soon. Make Walkie Ray bring you down here and bring you to dinner, and we'll help you use some of those coupons. So
that would be very nice.
Thanks very much. Everyone, get ready for February 23rd, a week from today. John Morlock will be our speaker, and we'll look forward to having him back. I like to end these sessions with a quote, and I did a little research on Confucius, and I was surprised to learn, not being a great historian, that Confucius lived in 551 to 479 BC, and which means he died precisely 2,500 years ago. I don't think people will be quoting me 2,500 years from now, but we're still quoting Confucius. And what he was famous for was introducing ethics to religious tradition, and that lasted until the 20th century. So that's why we're still quoting him, I suppose. But perhaps it's time for Confucius to be reincarnated and come back both to China and maybe even to worldwide to help spread some of his sayings. And I noted one here that I'll leave us on, and that's Confucius said, "Ask yourself constantly, what is the right thing to do?" And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're adjourned. Thank you, Professor Fingar, and we are adjourned.